In episode 2 for practical applications for combat sport S&C, we're going to touch on the topic of performance testing, and the question is to test or not to test. That is the question. I got some notes in front of me that I made, and just to go through a couple of bullet points and see if I can advise people on the pros and cons of performance testing. Before we dive into the first bullet point, what we need to probably cover is what is performance testing. I wrote the first bullet point down, what actually provides the S&C practitioner. Does it inform them for program design, what the athlete's strengths and weaknesses are? So we'll provide informative data to facilitate decision making during program design. Example, influence areas which may need more attention, such as lack of strength or speed. An example of this is if you look to test a combat sport athlete's upper body strength during, say, a 3 or 5 rep max chin-up, and you've got some data to compare it to where you might judge the athlete being weak in this area, adequate or excellent. If you compare the results to that data, you can get a good indication if you need to direct more training towards developing upper body strength. Now, the second bullet point I see is an important factor in performance testing. I've touched on testing must replicate attributes seen within the sport. So a practical example would be if you got a athlete from a sport and their sport maybe requires 2 to 3 minutes of effort, but the predominant energy system within the sport is anaerobic, and you perform testing, say a 5-kilometer run. What is your reasoning behind that? And what is your reason for applying that for the athlete? What are you getting out of that? If their sport requires a different system, why are you testing the opposite system? And this is probably seen a lot within combat sports, as we know a lot of boxers, Thai fighters, even just MMA, they do a lot of road running, which I'm not against, but there has to be context behind why you're doing something. And if it is at a detriment to the athlete, then for me, it probably needs to be thrown in the bin. What we need to do with the testing to see what attributes we need to develop and what the sport requires, we probably need to look a little bit further into energy systems for that sport. The third point I wanted to touch on also is the beauty of the fancy equipment during testing. I spoke to plenty of coaches, and this may be an issue from, social media, believing that you need the new fanciest, latest equipment, whether that's velocity-based device or vertical jump mat. And I've been there in the past when I feel that maybe I can't test an athlete if I haven't got the correct equipment or the most expensive equipment. But having a little practice and utilising certain pieces which may be a little bit cheaper, a little bit simpler to use, more accessible, there is ways around these more expensive options. So what I've noted down is you don't need fancy equipment to conduct testing on athletes. Simple and cheaper methods are just as useful if they are reliable and repeatable. That's a big thing that you need to take into consideration. Are they reliable? Have they been used by other practitioners? Is research backed? An example I use a lot with this is a vertical jump mat versus My Jump 2. I think this was designed by J.B. Moran. May be mistaken there. Correct me in the comments if I am wrong, so we can get the right reference for that person. The app is £10, and there is some human error when you have to dictate the landing and the takeoff, but if you get it right consistently, you can definitely see where an athlete is either progressed or regressed within a jump. That versus spending out on, say, a £400-500 jump mat that you might only get to use with maybe 1 or 2 athletes. The investment to return is probably not worth it when there's a lot more accessible devices and simpler methods that you can use on your smartphone, iPhone, just simple tools that will still get the best outcome. The second to last bullet point here, which I've picked up from a couple of practitioners within the industry is integrating performance testing within the program. Now we know that in the past, teams, individual athletes, when you take time out to conduct performance testing, it can take one, a lot out of the athlete, two, a lot out of the staff and the coaches, three, maybe too much allocated time to trying to get some data from certain tests. This may take up around 5 to 7 days. If you're doing maybe more and more tests, it could take anywhere up to 2 weeks. Now, if you've only got a combat athlete for a certain amount of time, especially when you're in a fight camp, if you have an athlete for 12 weeks and you conduct testing for 2 weeks, now there's 2 weeks gone and you've got 10 weeks to go to get them prepared. So there needs to be designated time maybe within the program where you can integrate it, so you can use your time better on developing the athlete. So an example I've used here is incorporating on upper body strength day. So if you have an example split into 2 days where you utilize upper body strength movement and a lower body strength movement, you could incorporate on maybe week 1 the strength testing within the program which you've already designed, and you could then use that data and results to then push on to make more decisions further on down the line. With this, you can minimize overall accumulated fatigue. Like we mentioned before, if you're using a full week for testing, the athlete also has to recover from that full week of testing, because we know that with tests we probably have to push as close as we can to 100%. So we're doing 100% effort within strength tests, power tests, conditioning tests. You know that week is really going to be a tough week at the start of the very camp or wherever you decide to put it in, and it's going to take its toll on the athlete. So integrating the performance testing within program design is definitely one of the better ways to hurt the athlete less and still get the correct data that you are looking for. The final bullet point which I wanted to touch upon and is quite important, and maybe goes against what I've been talking about, but again, this is what it's about. It's discussing the pros and cons and then deciding what the overall outcome should be of doing performance testing. So what I wrote down is testing is testing, and it should be left at that. Don't get it twisted that great results will automatically transfer to enhanced technical or sporting ability. So what that means is pretty much if you get an athlete who smashes all your tests out the park, yeah, that may or may not transfer over to their sporting ability. So although they done really well on all the physical aspects of testing, their technical ability might be down here versus their physical output. So this just gives us a small insight to that athlete and what they may need to work on. Again, what I wrote down here is pretty much what I've said. This is just a small piece of the puzzle that may add 1% increase in the athlete's overall capabilities. Sporting practice rules all. So now what do we do from here? 1, you probably got to go away and decide whether performance testing is for you and whether you can use it with your athlete. 2, don't be scared to fail. You will fail, but you also learn from it. I've done it. I've learned from it. I know what works for certain athletes. I know what doesn't work for certain athletes. But the only way you can get out and learn from it yourself is through experiencing it and putting it into practical application. That's exactly what these videos are for, to give you some examples. We've touched upon all information. People can give all information in the world, but it needs to be in a certain context for you to learn from it. So get out there and practice.